So let's talk about your books a little bit. Yeah, you mentioned briefly in the beginning that so they're in the same world, but there's kind of separate standalone novels. So maybe if you want to talk about what your plans are for that, but how you also kind of came to that as opposed to just writing a kind of linear series.
Yeah, I mean, part of the idea was, and this is just looking at other people who've come before me and what they've done successfully, is we've got the main series, which is book one, The Dryads Crown, called, the series is Tales from Eeriel, and this is book one. Uh, One of the minor characters in this book, um, we explore her in more detail in this book. So she's a popular character in the book. I've had enough readers come back to say, we love Bren Caius. Bren is one of my favorite characters. So it's like, okay, well,
Mm-hmm.
let's do a smaller story about Bren in her prime. And that became War of the Hounds, which is a self-contained book. Part of the reason why we did the self-contained is because you can get this book for free as an ebook if you sign up for my newsletter, which people have been doing for a long time now. It's the old newsletter incentive, because if I can build
Yeah.
up a good newsletter list, I can sell the series as it comes out, and it's a lot
Mm-hmm.
easier. Now, the paperback is $9.99, so it's a smaller price point. So this becomes a nice jumping in point for someone who maybe they don't want to read the big chunker of the first book, but they read this and they go, okay, this is pretty thrilling. Let's see what else is going on in this world. And then they get into this larger series, which Tales from Eeriel, right now, the arc that I'm working on is probably about 4 books. And I like doing these in between books as well, because they allow me a little bit of freedom to experiment, to try new things. This one is actually a retelling of Shakespeare's Henry V, War of the
Mm,
Hounds is. And so that's something that I could experiment with. I'm not going to take those kind of chances on the main series. The main
sure.
series is precious. I want to get it right. But if I say, I wonder if I could write a 100-page long epic poem set in the world of my series, that's something that might work as a smaller book. And if I fall on my face, it's not too big of a loss.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I always find that fun to like. I always love little short stories or novellas that go with stuff because I think it just gives so much fun context to things. And I think as I've been writing my first book, and I've also started a prequel novella that I'm pretty close to, but I always start short stories because I generally am like, I need to explore this character for a moment. Like I don't know maybe quite their personality yet, or I don't know how they would act in a sort. So then I started. So I have like a ton of short stories that maybe someday I'll put together, but most of the time that just ends. That's like it's like a writing exercise of like I just need to discover what is going on here, and some of it's trash, some of it I'm like, hey, that's not too bad, but that yeah. So I love all that kind of stuff.
Oh, I completely agree with you. When I transitioned from comics to writing prose, I started off writing short stories because, like you said, each short story can be a little bit of a challenge. You go, okay, I'm going to write this short story from this perspective, or I'm going to tell it in this point of view, or I'm going to make sure that it's just action from beginning to end, or I'm going to try to do one that has no, this or that. And you kind of set these little challenges for yourself just to see. I mean, it's like a workout. You're flexing muscles that you didn't know you had. And then some
Hmm.
of that ends up in your longer books where you go, okay, I now have a better control over dialogue. And it's in part because I wrote a short story that was only dialogue.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
and, and yeah, those are great exercises that, yeah, it helps kind of build up your skills so that you're willing to be a little bit more daring in your longer works.
Yeah. Do you find that those also help you? Because, like, every creative, regardless of field, you have different strengths and weaknesses of like some you're better at certain things. Like, I remember when I first handed any of my writing to my brother, who I generally he writes, and we kind of talk about it a lot. One of the first things he says, he was like, your fight scenes are great. I know what's going on. I can follow it and all this stuff. But he's like, but your dialogue is terrible. Like, so it's those kind of, so do you use that also for like, okay, I'm not doing so well on this aspect, so I need to work on that. So I'm going to write this dialogue story.
Yeah, to some degree. I think that this is where reader feedback is very helpful. When you get that first book out and you start getting some reviews coming in, or you get beta reader feedback, you find out really quickly kind of what you're good at. It's like you said, you find out, oh, I can write an action sequence or a fight scene pretty well. And maybe you didn't realize that about yourself. For me, I didn't think that I had a lot of people saying that they really liked the emotional depth of the story. They felt like there was a lot of emotional ups and downs. And I had never really thought about myself being a writer like that. And so now when I advertise the book and when I talk about my writing, I lean into that because I know it's a strength that people see. It's something they enjoy. But yeah, I've never had anyone comment on how great my dialogue is. So it's more that, I mean, I can't avoid dialogue in my stories, so I can't get away from it. But I also know that I need to not be too flamboyant with my dialogue, because I know that that's an area where I'm probably not going to pull it off as well as I'd hoped. So I'm going to stay kind of in my lane with the dialogue. I'm going to be a little bit more meat and potatoes, basic kind of things, just so that I make sure I get what I need to get across. Whereas with other things that I know I'm a little bit stronger on, I might take more risks.
Yeah. Yeah, who knows? I feel like dialogue's always hardest for me because I'm like, it's like I start writing a scene and then I'm like, I don't know how people talk to each other. Like, I don't, it's like all of a sudden you have to think about how a conversation is constructed. And then you're just like, I don't even know how to do this,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think even someone like Joss Whedon, who I think developed kind of the Marvel style of dialogue where it's just so quippy. So much of that depends on the delivery. If I had a Sarah Michelle Gellar delivering my lines, or if I had someone like Chris Evans or Robert Downey Jr. delivering the lines, people would be like, oh man, the dialogue's so great. It's like, well, it's also because you have really great actors who are able to really highlight some of the stuff that you're trying to do there. So for me, it's also about, like, am I creating a character where you hear them speaking so that when you're performing it in your head, you might be elevating the dialogue more than it actually is. Like, you're like, wow, this dialogue's so great. Like, maybe the dialogue's not great. Maybe you just hear that character really well and they're performing it for you. So I think in novel form, it's tricky to do dialogue well because the performance is something that is missed.